I had always considered myself to be someone who valued honesty and loyalty above all else. It wasn't that I was a hopeless romantic, but I truly believed in the power of a strong, honest relationship. My name is Ryan, and I've been with Maria for over 4 years. At first, things were perfect. She was everything I had ever dreamed of: kind, loving, and fiercely loyal. The early days of our relationship were filled with laughter, shared experiences, and an undeniable connection. We had our quirks, sure, but who doesn't? We were building something special, or so I thought. Maria and I shared everything: our hopes, our fears, our dreams. The kind of bond we had was what most people would envy. We did everything together, from lazy Sundays spent watching old movies to adventurous trips to places we'd never been. Her smile, her laughter, her touch, all of it had become ingrained in my life, and I was certain this was it. We talked about a future, about getting married someday, and even about raising kids. I thought we were on the same page. But recently, there had been something off. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The moments of closeness I once felt were slipping away, replaced with silence. Maria's busy schedule had her working late more often, and when she wasn't working, she seemed distracted. I couldn't help but notice how little we spoke. It wasn't just the physical distance, it was emotional too. We weren't talking like we used to. The intimacy seemed to be fading, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bring it back. One evening, after another half-hearted attempt at a conversation that never quite took off, I found myself reaching out to Ben, a friend I had known for years. Ben was the type of guy I could talk to about anything. He wasn't judgmental, always listened, and gave advice when I needed it most. We'd known each other through high school, and though our lives had taken different paths, we always found time to check in. Lately, though, I'd been leaning on him more than usual. I wasn't exactly sure why. Maybe it was because Ben had this calm about him that made me feel better when I was uncertain or confused. I started to tell him about the tension between Maria and me. He seemed to listen with an understanding that was almost too comforting. He didn't tell me I was overthinking things, didn't rush to offer solutions. He just let me vent, and it felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders every time I talked to him. It was around that time when I noticed how often I found myself turning to Ben, how much we were talking. We spent more time together, grabbing coffee, talking about life, sharing stories from our pasts. With each passing day, it became harder to ignore the connection I felt with him. It wasn't something I was looking for, but it was undeniable. Our friendship had deepened, and I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone in a long time. There were moments when his words seemed to cut deeper than they should have. Moments when his laugh seemed to resonate in a way that made me feel things I wasn't used to feeling. Maria never seemed to ask about Ben, and I never brought him up. Perhaps that was the first red flag, though I didn't recognize it at the time. When I did see Maria, she was distant, smiling less, answering my questions more curtly. It wasn't anything overt, just small signs that something wasn't quite right. I didn't know how to confront her, how to bridge this gap that had formed between us. I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch, that things would get better if I gave it time. But with Ben, I started noticing something more. He became the one person I turned to for reassurance. He understood me in ways Maria didn't seem to anymore. The late-night phone calls, the long chats about everything and nothing, they became my lifeline. In some twisted way, I felt safe talking to him, even though I couldn't quite figure out why. Maybe it was the way he listened, or maybe it was the comfort of someone who didn't demand anything from me. Whatever it was, I was drawn to him. And that scared me. Still, I kept pushing those thoughts aside. After all, I was in a committed relationship with Maria, right? I couldn't be having feelings for Ben. I had no intention of crossing any lines. He was my friend and nothing more than that. But the moments between us, those shared silences, the glances that lingered just a little too long, kept gnawing at me. There was something there, something that shouldn't be there, but I wasn't ready to face it. Maria and I went through the motions, trying to act as if everything was fine. We'd have dinner together, watch a movie, but the spark was gone. The emotional connection was fading, and I couldn't ignore it. And though I wasn't ready to admit it to myself, I couldn't help but wonder if she had already checked out. The idea of infidelity had never crossed my mind until now. I couldn't even picture it. Maria would never do that to me, right? But something about the distance between us felt like it was building to something I wasn't prepared to confront. I still believed in us. I wanted to believe that the love we shared was enough to carry us through whatever rough patch we were in. But in the back of my mind, a quiet voice kept asking, what if it's more than just a rough patch? What if something's already broken? I tried to push it down, to ignore the nagging feeling, but it wouldn't go away. Something was wrong, and I wasn't sure I could fix it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the silence between Maria and me. It was the subtle shifts in her behavior that made my stomach churn. At first, I brushed it off as stress or something temporary. Maybe work was wearing her down, or maybe I was overthinking things. But as days passed, the small signs grew harder to ignore. She had started working late more frequently, her texts to me were brief and often lacked any warmth, and our conversations seemed forced, as if we were both trying too hard to pretend things were fine. The worst part was, when I tried to talk about it, she would brush it off, saying she was just tired or had a lot on her plate. Still, it wasn't just Maria's behavior that caught my attention. I began to notice how often I turned to Ben for support. The more I struggled with the distance between Maria and me, the more I found myself reaching out to him. What began as casual check-ins evolved into deeper conversations about life, love, and my relationship. Ben was always there, always willing to listen, and his words offered a sense of comfort that Maria's distant responses didn't. It wasn't that I was looking for something else, I wasn't. But somehow, every conversation with Ben made me feel understood in ways I hadn't felt in months. It was as though he could read between the lines of what I was saying, picking up on things I hadn't even acknowledged myself. One evening, after another silent dinner with Maria, I found myself texting Ben again. The message was simple. How's everything going? It wasn't anything special, but the exchange that followed seemed to cut through the fog of uncertainty I was drowning in. Ben didn't just ask about me. He asked about Maria, about the distance between us. He didn't do it in a way that felt intrusive or out of line, but there was an underlying concern in his words. You seem off lately. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The proof, once it was clear, couldn't be denied. I had been dancing around the truth for days, weeks even, but now, there it was, staring me in the face. It wasn't a text message or a phone call that did it. It was a simple, unexpected moment that shattered everything. I had gone to the apartment we shared after a long day, hoping to talk things through with Maria. Maybe I was still holding on to some hope that we could fix this. But when I opened the door, I was met with the sound of her voice. She was talking to someone on the phone, and though I couldn't make out the exact words, the tone in her voice made my blood run cold. She was laughing. It wasn't the laugh I had heard countless times before, the warm, genuine laugh I loved. No, this one was different. It was light, flirtatious. I should have turned around, walked out, and left it alone. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, listening. She kept talking, her voice soft and playful. Then came the words I never thought I would hear. I can't wait to see you tonight. I didn't need any more confirmation. The room spun around me as my chest tightened. My heart felt like it was about to explode in my chest. For a moment, I considered leaving, pretending I hadn't heard anything, hoping I could forget. But I couldn't. The truth was already out. I had heard it, and there was no going back. I waited for her to finish the conversation, my mind racing. Every second felt like an eternity. When she hung up the phone and turned to face me, I didn't speak immediately. I couldn't. The words felt stuck in my throat. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this? We were supposed to be building something together. Everything we had, everything I had given her, meant nothing to her. Finally, I spoke, my voice coming out shaky. Who was that? Her eyes widened for a split second, then quickly narrowed as she took a deep breath. It was just a friend.
Why are you asking about that?
She tried to brush it off like it was nothing. I couldn't keep it inside any longer. The words exploded out of me. You're seeing someone else, aren't you? For a moment, She said nothing. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and I saw it. The guilt, the shame. She wasn't even trying to lie anymore. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and I could hear the weight of her regret. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." The pain of hearing those words was suffocating. It felt like a dagger to the chest, and I couldn't breathe. My mind raced. How long had this been going on? Was I just a fool, oblivious to the signs? "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice sharp. Her gaze flickered for a moment before she answered, her words barely audible. "It's James. You know him. We've been working together for a while."
James.
Of course. The same James the first had heard her mention a few times before. The one who had been so close, the one I had brushed off as just a colleague. But now I realized how blind I had been. Every time she had mentioned him, there had been a smile in her voice, a warmth I hadn't noticed before. I couldn't look at her anymore. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. How could she betray me like this? We had built a life together. I trusted her. I gave her everything, and this was what I got in return. The silence between us stretched on, thick and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to yell, to make her feel the pain that was tearing me apart. But I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady but cold. "You've been lying to me. You've been seeing him behind my back, and I've been too blind to see it." Her face crumpled in shame, but she didn't try to deny it. "I never meant to hurt you, Ryan. It just happened." I was confused, and No. I cut her off. "You weren't confused. You knew exactly what you were doing. You chose him over me. You betrayed me, Maria. You took something that was mine and destroyed it." Her lips trembled as she tried to reach out to me.
Please don't say that. I'm sorry.
"I'm so sorry." But I couldn't hear her apologies. The hurt was too deep, too raw. I couldn't even look at her without feeling like I was suffocating. "I need to leave," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to remain calm. She nodded silently, not even trying to stop me. She knew there was nothing left to say. I walked out, feeling like the world had caved in on me. The door slammed behind me with finality, and the silence that followed was deafening. I had been betrayed by the one person I thought I could trust. And worse, I had ignored the signs, allowed myself to be blinded by my own need to believe in something that was already falling apart. As I stood outside, staring at the darkened streets, I felt numb. There was no relief, no sense of closure, only emptiness. What I had once known as love was now a distant memory, a dream that had been shattered beyond repair. And there was no way to undo the damage. There was no going back from this. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a haze, a fog that seemed impossible to shake. I had left Maria's apartment that night, but I couldn't leave the situation behind. Every thought, every memory, came flooding back, each one sharp, jagged, and painful. I tried to convince myself that I was better off without her, that the betrayal was something I would eventually move past, but the reality was far harder to swallow. I couldn't escape the truth. I had loved her, trusted her, and now I felt completely empty. The apartment felt like a foreign place now. It was no longer the home I had built with Maria. The walls, once filled with laughter and shared moments, now seemed to echo with the silence of what was lost. I spent most of my time there staring at the walls, barely eating, and hardly sleeping. My mind kept replaying every interaction, every conversation, wondering if there had been something I missed. If I had ignored the signs, or if I was just a fool who couldn't see the truth until it was too late. Ben had been reaching out to me, of course. He knew something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to talk to him. He was the one person who had been there for me throughout everything, but I couldn't bring myself to admit how much I was struggling. I wasn't ready to face the fact that I had let myself be so deceived. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to ignore my instincts. I had put my trust in Maria, and she had shattered it. The first time I spoke to Maria again, it was on the phone. She called me, and for a long time, I just let it ring, unwilling to pick up. I didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to listen to whatever excuse she had to offer. But after the fourth ring, I answered. Ryan, please, she said, her voice fragile. I know I've hurt you, and I'm so sorry. But I need you to understand. It wasn't just about James. I've been confused, and I've made terrible choices. I never wanted to hurt you. You mean everything to me. I couldn't believe her words, not after everything. Don't say that. Don't tell me I mean everything to you when you've been seeing someone else behind my back. You destroyed everything we had, Maria. I can't just forget that. She was silent for a long time, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. I don't know what to say, Ryan. I know I've lost you, and I deserve that. I just want you to know